The day had been long and the air smelled of rain and dust. The monsoon clouds had rolled across the Arizona sky since morning, wrapping the mountains in a heavy gray silence. Tom Leland sat inside his small ranger cabin, listening to the low rumble of thunder in the distance. He was used to storms like this. They came fast, roaring through the Gila forest with wind and water that could change the land in a single hour. Tom worked as a forest ranger near the San Carlos Apache reservation. He had lived alone for years, watching over trails, helping travelers, and keeping an eye on the river when the rains came. The people on the reservation knew him well. They said he was quiet but kind. He never talked much, but when he did, his words carried meaning. He respected their land, their traditions, and their way of life. That afternoon, as the storm passed, Tom decided to check the lower river crossing. The water had been rising fast over the past few days, and he worried it might overflow again. He packed his old truck with a flashlight, rope, and a small first aid kit. The rain had softened to a mist by the time he reached the river. The smell of wet sage filled the air, and the sky glowed faintly with the fading light of evening. When he parked near the bridge, everything seemed quiet, too quiet. The river usually made a soft humming sound, but tonight it growled and swirled like something alive. Tom stepped closer to the edge, shining his flashlight over the muddy water. He watched the current twist around branches and tree roots that had been pulled loose from the storm. Then something caught his eye, a shape tangled in a fallen log near the far bank. At first, he thought it was just a piece of cloth, maybe someone's jacket washed downstream. But as the light flickered across it, he felt a chill run through him. It wasn't just cloth, it was the sleeve of a small shirt. Tom's heart began to race. He moved closer, sliding down the bank until the cold water touched his boots. The shape didn't move. The river was deep and wild there, but he didn't think twice. He took off his jacket, threw his flashlight onto a rock, and stepped into the water. The cold hit him like ice. The current pulled hard against his legs, but he kept going, one step at a time. When he reached the log, he saw her. A little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, caught in the branches. Her hair was tangled with leaves, her skin pale and still. Tom grabbed the log with one hand and pulled her free with the other. The river tried to take them both, but he held her close and fought his way back toward the shore. He stumbled out of the water, gasping for breath. The girl wasn't moving. Her small face looked peaceful, like she was asleep, but Tom knew she wasn't breathing. He laid her on the grass, brushed the hair from her face, and started pressing on her chest the way he'd been trained years ago. He spoke softly as if she could hear him. "Come on, little one, stay with me. You're all right. You're gonna be all right." For a few long seconds, nothing happened. The rain fell in gentle drops around them. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then suddenly the girl coughed, a small, weak sound, but enough to fill Tom's heart with relief. Water spilled from her mouth and she began to breathe again. Her chest rose and fell unevenly, and her eyes fluttered open. She looked at Tom, confused and frightened, not yet understanding what had happened. "It's okay," Tom whispered. "You're safe now." He wrapped his jacket around her and carried her to the truck. He turned on the heater, rubbing her small hands to bring back warmth. She didn't speak, only stared at him with wide, dark eyes that seemed to hold something deeper than fear. After a few minutes, Tom drove toward the nearest cluster of houses on the reservation. The dirt road was slippery, but he knew every turn by heart. When he reached the village, he honked twice. Lights came on in several homes, and soon a woman came running toward the truck. Her cries broke the stillness of the night. "Nita!" she shouted, rushing to the girl. It was her mother, Elena. She took Nita in her arms, rocking her, thanking Tom through tears. The small crowd that gathered around them murmured prayers of thanks. Tom stood quietly, unsure what to do. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. One of the elders placed a hand on his shoulder and said softly, "You pulled her from the river. The river took her, but you gave her back. That means something." Tom nodded, not fully understanding, but he felt the weight of the man's words. After making sure the girl was safe and the family had everything they needed, he drove back to his cabin. The road glistened under the moonlight. The rain had stopped, and the stars were beginning to break through the clouds. Inside his cabin, Tom sat by the small fire he'd left burning earlier. He couldn't stop thinking about the girl's eyes, the way she'd looked at him after waking up. There had been something powerful in that gaze, like recognition, or maybe a promise. He had rescued people before, hikers lost in the woods, travelers stuck in floods. But this felt different. This felt personal. The next morning, Tom woke up early as usual. He made a cup of coffee and sat on the porch, watching the mist lift from the trees. The sound of birds slowly replaced the quiet rush of the night before. Everything looked calm, almost normal again. But inside, he felt restless. He couldn't shake the image of Nita's small hands clutching his jacket. A few hours later, he went back to the reservation to check on her. Elena met him outside their modest home, smiling gratefully. Nita was sitting nearby, wrapped in a blanket, playing with a small wooden doll. When she saw Tom, she stood up. For a moment, she just looked at him. Then she walked over and handed him a feather she'd been holding. Tom took it gently. "Thank you," he said. "She wanted you to have it," Elena said softly. "She says you belong to the river now. That's how she remembers people who come back." Tom didn't quite know what to say, but he nodded and smiled. He stayed for a while, helping fix a fence that had been damaged by the storm. Before leaving, he looked back once more. Nita was still watching him, silent and still, her small hand raised in a quiet wave. That night, Tom sat outside again, the feather lying on the porch rail beside him. The moon shone bright over the river valley, silvering the world in soft light. The air was cool, and the land smelled fresh and new after the rain. But somewhere deep inside, Tom felt that something had changed. The forest felt different, almost watchful. He didn't know it yet, but that moment by the river had tied their lives together in a way neither of them could understand. The river had taken Nita, and he had brought her back. In the old Apache stories, that kind of act carried a meaning. Beyond saving a life, it was a spiritual bond, one that could follow a person for years, even across great distances. As the fire crackled beside him, Tom thought he heard soft footsteps near the trees, but when he looked, there was nothing there. Only the sound of the wind moving through the branches and the distant whisper of the river, flowing endlessly through the night. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and let the quiet settle around him. The feather trembled slightly in the breeze. Somewhere out there, a little girl slept safely in her bed, and though he didn't know why, Tom felt a strange comfort, knowing that their lives had somehow become connected by the water that had nearly taken her away. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that storm slowly faded for most people on the reservation. But for Tom Leland, it stayed close. Like a quiet echo he could still hear whenever he stood near the river. He went back to his work as usual, checking trails, helping travelers, and filing his weekly reports. Yet something had changed in his life, something small but steady. Almost every morning when Tom stepped out of his cabin, he saw her. Nita, the little Apache girl he had pulled from the river. She would be sitting on a rock near the path, her dark hair tied back with a small blue ribbon. She didn't speak much, and she never came too close. She would just sit there quietly, sometimes smiling when their eyes met, and then follow him as he began his rounds through the forest. At first, Tom thought it was a coincidence. Maybe she liked walking near the woods. Maybe she felt safe around him after what had happened. He didn't want to scare her away, so he simply let her be. He would do his work, measuring water levels, clearing fallen branches, fixing signs, and she would trail behind him at a distance, picking flowers or collecting colorful stones. When he stopped to rest, she would sit nearby, humming softly to herself. One day, he finally said, "Nita, you don't have to follow me every day, you know. The forest can be dangerous sometimes." The girl looked up at him with calm eyes and said, "The river told me to stay close." Tom smiled a little, unsure what she meant. "The river told you that?" he asked gently. She nodded. "It remembers you. It says you belong to it now, like me." Her words puzzled him. He didn't want to dismiss her beliefs. He knew the Apache people had deep respect for the land, the water, and all living things. To them, nature was alive and carried messages for those who listened. But he couldn't help feeling a quiet unease whenever she said things like that. Still, her presence became part of his days. Sometimes she brought him small gifts, a smooth river stone painted with bright red lines, a tiny wooden carving, or a bundle of wildflowers tied with twine. She would hand them to him silently, watching his face as if the gifts carried something important. One afternoon, Tom stopped by the riverbank where he had rescued her months earlier. The water was calm now, sparkling under the sunlight. Nita was there too, skipping stones across the surface. She turned to him suddenly and said, "The river doesn't forget." "What do you mean, Nita?" Tom asked softly. She looked at him, her small face serious. "When someone saves a life from the water remembers. It follows them. I follow you because the water follows you." Her words sent a shiver down his spine. He wanted to believe she was just a child speaking from imagination. But sometimes, when he was alone at night, he heard the soft sound of water running nearby, even when the river was miles away. Weeks passed. Tom received notice that he was being transferred to a new station several hours north, near the Tonto National Forest. It wasn't a big change, but it meant leaving behind the reservation, the cabin, and everything familiar. He went to tell Elena and Nita the news. Elena smiled kindly. "You have done so much for us, Tom. The people here won't forget what you did. Nita talks about you every day." Nita stood quietly beside her mother, holding a small woven pouch in her hands. When Tom bent down to say goodbye, she handed it to him. "It's for your journey," she said. He opened the pouch later that night and found 3 things inside: a feather, a small river stone, and a piece of cloth with blue and white patterns. He didn't understand their meaning, but he kept them safely in his bag. The next morning, before dawn, he packed his truck and began the long drive north. The air was cool and filled with the scent of pine. As he drove away, he looked once in the rearview mirror. For a moment, he thought he saw Nita standing by the roadside, watching his truck disappear into the distance. His new post was peaceful. The forest there was thick and green, with high cliffs and hidden streams. He liked the sound of birds echoing through the canyons. His new cabin was smaller, older, but it felt fine to him. He liked quiet places. At first, everything went smoothly. He made friends with a few locals, learned the trails, and got used to the new rhythm of the land. But soon, strange little things began to happen. He would wake up in the morning and find a fresh feather lying on his porch, though there were no birds' nests nearby. Sometimes a small pile of stones appeared near his steps, smooth, round river stones, the kind that belonged miles away. One evening, while checking a trail near a narrow stream, he thought he saw someone in the distance, a small figure standing among the trees. He called out, thinking it was a lost child, but no one answered. When he reached the spot, there was nothing there, only the sound of running water. It happened again a few days later. He was sitting outside drinking coffee under the stars when he heard soft footsteps behind his cabin. He turned, half expecting an animal. Instead, he saw a small shadow move across the edge of the trees. It was gone in seconds, but he felt sure. It was her, Nita. He tried to tell himself it was impossible. She was back on the reservation with her family, safe and happy. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was near. Maybe not in body, but in spirit. Like the echo of a bond that refused to break. One night, while rain tapped gently on the roof, Tom dreamed he was standing by the Gila River again. The sky was golden and the water ran clear and calm. Nita was standing on the opposite bank, smiling softly. "You can't leave the river," she said. "It flows with you." When he woke, his heart was racing. The dream had felt so real. He got up, stepped outside, and found that the ground around his cabin was wet, though the rain had stopped hours earlier. A small stream of water trickled past his boots, disappearing into the trees. He followed it for a few steps, but it faded into the earth as if it had never been there. Years went by. Tom grew older, moving from post to post, always near rivers, lakes, or streams. No matter where he went, he found the same small signs. A feather on his doorstep, a child's footprint in the mud, a smooth stone left near his window. He never married, never stayed in one place too long. But wherever he went, he felt that quiet presence nearby. Sometimes, when he was tired after a long day, he would sit by the water and speak softly as if talking to someone he couldn't see. He never heard an answer, but the air around him always grew calm, peaceful, like a gentle reminder that he wasn't alone. One spring evening, long after the world had changed and the forests had become quieter, Tom returned to visit the reservation. He found Elena's home still standing near the river. Nita was grown now, a young woman with calm, knowing eyes. When she saw him, she smiled. "You kept your promise," she said. Tom frowned gently. "What promise?" She touched the small pouch he still carried on his belt after all these years. "You kept the river's gift. That means it still walks with you." They stood together by the water, watching it move slowly under the golden light. There was peace between them, the kind that doesn't need words. When Tom left that evening, he turned back once more. Nita stood by the river just as she had years ago, her reflection moving gently with the current. He smiled. "You still follow me, don't you?" he said softly. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint sound of laughter, light and distant, like water over stones. From that day on, no matter where Tom went, he always felt her presence, not as a shadow, but as a quiet reminder that some connections are written deeper than time itself. He had pulled her from the river once, but some bonds, like the flow of water, never truly end.